The cold metal of handcuffs clicked around 15-year-old Maya's wrists in the school parking lot, her dark eyes wide with disbelief as Officer Derek Callahan read her rights in a tone that left no room for questions. And across the growing crowd of students, his son Tyler stood with arms crossed and a smirk barely hidden behind a mask of false concern, never imagining that this single moment would unravel everything he thought he knew about power, privilege, and the weight of consequences. Maya had only been at Riverside High for 3 weeks, transferring mid-semester after her mother, Judge Patricia Lawson, accepted a position at the county courthouse. And though Maya had tried to keep a low profile, her quiet confidence and refusal to shrink herself had immediately drawn Tyler's attention, not in admiration, but in challenge, because Tyler Callahan had ruled this school through fear and social manipulation for 2 years, using his father's badge as an invisible shield, and he couldn't stand that this new girl didn't seem remotely intimidated by him. It started small, whispered comments in the hallway, a accidentally spilled lunch tray, excluded invitations, but Maya held her head high, focused on her studies, made friends with the students Tyler had pushed to the margins. And that only fueled his resentment further, until one afternoon when Maya politely but firmly declined to let Tyler copy her answers during a chemistry exam, telling Mr. Henderson when Tyler persisted, which resulted in Tyler receiving his first academic warning in years. The humiliation burned in Tyler's chest through the weekend, festering into something darker, and by Monday morning he had formed a plan. He would teach this girl a lesson about who really held power in this town. So he stole Mrs. Patterson's diamond bracelet from her desk during lunch, the one she always removed before teaching art class, slipped it into Maya's backpack when she left it unattended in the library, then reported seeing Maya acting suspicious near the teacher's lounge, and when Mrs. Patterson discovered her bracelet missing, Tyler made sure to mention, with perfect false reluctance, that he'd seen Maya coming from that direction. The search happened quickly, the principal, apologetic but firm, as he asked Maya to open her bag, and the moment that bracelet tumbled out, Maya's protests of innocence were drowned out by gasps and whispers. Tyler's performance of shocked disappointment worthy of an award he'd never earn, and when the principal decided to call the police to handle this properly, Tyler had already texted his father, poisoning the well before Officer Callahan even arrived, describing Maya as troubled, aggressive, someone who didn't respect authority, painting a picture designed to trigger every unconscious bias his father carried. Officer Callahan arrived with assumptions already hardening into conclusions. Saw a young black girl he didn't know, insisting on her innocence. Saw his son's earnest face, confirming the story. Saw a teacher's expensive jewelry and a clear-cut case. And despite Maya's tearful explanations, despite her pleading for them to check security cameras, despite her asking them to call her mother, he made the decision to arrest her, leading her out in handcuffs in front of the entire school, as phones recorded, and Maya's face burned with shame and fury at the injustice of it all. At the station, Maya sat in a cold interrogation room, refusing to speak until her mother arrived, and when Judge Patricia Lawson walked through those doors 2 hours later, the temperature in the building seemed to drop 10 degrees, not because she yelled or threatened, but because her presence carried the weight of someone who understood exactly how the system worked, and how it had just failed her daughter. She greeted Officer Callahan with professional courtesy that somehow felt more cutting than anger, listened to his explanation of the evidence and the witnesses, and calmly requested the security footage from the school, the detailed timeline, and the name of every person who had access to Maya's belongings that day, her legal mind already dismantling the case, piece by piece. And as she sat beside Maya, holding her daughter's trembling hand, she whispered, "We will prove the truth, baby, but more importantly, we're going to make sure this never happens to another child." The security footage told a different story than Tyler had crafted it, showed him lingering near Mrs. Patterson's desk during lunch, showed him approaching Maya's unattended backpack in the library, showed movements and timelines that contradicted his statement, and when the school's IT specialist enhanced the footage at Judge Lawson's request, Tyler's actions became undeniable. The principal called an emergency meeting the next morning with Tyler, his father, Maya, her mother, and the school district's attorney. And as the footage played on the screen, Tyler's face drained of color, while Officer Callahan's hands gripped the armrests of his chair, watching his son's lies unfold in high definition, watching the moment Tyler planted evidence on an innocent girl, and the realization hit him like a physical blow. He had arrested a child, humiliated her publicly, traumatized her, all because he had trusted his son without question and allowed his own assumptions to cloud his judgment. The room was silent except for the video's audio, and when it ended, Tyler opened his mouth to make excuses, but his father's broken voice cut through. Don't say anything right now." And the devastation in Officer Callahan's eyes showed a man confronting the failure of his parenting and his policing in the same terrible moment. Judge Lawson could have buried them both. She had grounds for a lawsuit, for professional complaints, for public exposure that would have destroyed careers and reputations. And everyone in that room knew it. But instead she looked at Tyler, really looked at him, and saw not a monster, but a lost boy who had never learned that power without responsibility becomes tyranny, that privilege without empathy becomes cruelty. And she made a decision that surprised everyone, including herself. "I'm not interested in revenge," Judge Lawson said quietly, her arm around Maya's shoulders. "But I am interested in transformation, in accountability, and in making sure you understand the magnitude of what you've done. You didn't just steal a bracelet and lie about it. You weaponized the police. You exploited racial bias. You tried to give my daughter a criminal record that could have followed her for life. And you did it because she had the audacity to say no to you, to stand up for herself. And that tells me you've never really understood what it means to have power, or what to do with it." Tyler's tears started then. Not the manipulative crying he'd used before, but the genuine breakdown of someone seeing himself clearly for the first time. And Officer Callahan's own eyes were wet as he listened to the harm his son had caused. The harm he himself had compounded by being so ready to believe the worst about Maya. Judge Lawson proposed a restorative justice approach. Instead of traditional punishment, Tyler would face consequences, including community service, mandatory counseling, a formal apology to Maya and Mrs. Patterson, a presentation to the school about bias and false accusations, and a suspension. But he would also have the chance to actually learn and change rather than just being cast out. And Officer Callahan would undergo additional training on implicit bias and juvenile justice, would volunteer his time mentoring at-risk youth, and would personally ensure that the arrest record was completely expunged and that Maya received a formal apology from the department. Maya initially resisted. The hurt was too fresh, the humiliation of those handcuffs too raw, and she wanted Tyler to suffer as she had suffered. But her mother sat with her that night in their living room, the fireplace casting warm shadows across their faces, and shared her own story of being wrongly accused as a young attorney, of how the hunger for revenge had nearly consumed her, and how she'd ultimately found more power in forcing people to confront what they'd done and change than in simply punishing them. "Baby, you have every right to be angry," Judge Lawson said, holding both of Maya's hands in hers, "and I will support whatever you decide. But I also know that sometimes the bravest thing isn't striking back. It's demanding that people do better and actually believing they can." The next week, Tyler stood before the entire school in an assembly, his voice shaking as he read a statement he'd written and rewritten a dozen times, confessing what he had done to Maya, acknowledging how he'd abused his privilege, explaining the racist assumptions he'd exploited, and taking full responsibility without excuses or justifications. And the silence in that auditorium was deafening. Students, seeing their powerful tormentor reduced to a trembling, accountable human being. I told myself I was just teaching her a lesson, Tyler said, his voice cracking. But the truth is, I was scared that if someone like Maya, someone who didn't fear me or need my approval, could succeed here, then maybe all the power I thought I had was just an illusion. Maybe I wasn't actually special or important. Maybe I was just a bully hiding behind my father's uniform, and instead of dealing with that fear, I tried to destroy her, and I almost did, and I will have to live with that for the rest of my life. Maya sat in the front row, her mother beside her, and though her face remained composed, her heart was a storm of emotions. Anger still lingered. But something else was emerging too. Something like recognition that Tyler's confession, his genuine shame and remorse, was costing him everything he'd built his identity on. And that took a different kind of courage than she'd expected from him. The weeks that followed were not easy, or simple healing never is, but slowly, through mandated conversations with a trained mediator, through Tyler's community service at the youth center, where Maya volunteered, through honest and often painful dialogues about race, privilege, and power, something began to shift. Tyler started seeing the students he'd marginalized as actual people with their own stories, started understanding how his father's badge had created a protection he'd never earned, started recognizing the unconscious messages he'd absorbed about who mattered and who didn't, and the weight of that knowledge was crushing at first. But his counselor helped him understand that guilt without action was just self-indulgence. That real change meant doing the work every single day. Officer Callahan underwent his own transformation, attending workshops on racial bias in policing, reading books his wife bought him about systemic injustice, having difficult conversations with Judge Lawson about how he'd failed Maya and how many other children. He might have failed throughout his career, and the realization that his good intentions had never been enough to overcome his blind spots was humbling in a way that made him a better officer and a better father. 6 months after the arrest, on a warm spring evening, the community center hosted a youth leadership awards ceremony, and Maya was receiving recognition for her tutoring program that had helped struggling students raise their grades. And when her name was called, she walked to the stage with her head high, accepting the award from Judge Lawson herself, who looked at her daughter with such fierce pride that everyone in the room could feel it. And as Maya gave her acceptance speech about resilience and community, Tyler sat in the audience beside his father, applauding with genuine admiration. No longer the boy who needed to diminish others to feel big, but someone learning to find worth in lifting others up. After the ceremony, Tyler approached Maya hesitantly, respecting her space, waiting for her acknowledgement. And when she finally nodded, he said simply, "You deserved that award. Your tutoring program helped my cousin pass algebra, and she told me you stayed late 3 nights a week to help her. And I just wanted you to know that I see the difference you're making, and I'm grateful you gave me the chance to learn to make a difference too, instead of just destroying things." Maya studied his face, looking for traces of the smirking bully from the parking lot, but finding instead a work in progress, someone genuinely trying to be better. And while she wasn't ready to call him a friend, she recognized him as someone on a journey similar to her own, just from a different starting point. "We all have the capacity to harm or to heal," she said finally, echoing words her mother had shared with her. "And every day we choose which one we're going to do. I'm glad you're choosing differently now, Tyler, and I hope you keep choosing it, especially when it's hard, especially when no one's watching." Officer Callahan, standing nearby with Judge Lawson, overheard the exchange, and the two parents shared a look of profound relief and hope, knowing their children had both grown through this nightmare in ways that would shape the rest of their lives. That summer, Tyler and several other students joined Maya's community service initiative, painting murals in underserved neighborhoods, organizing supply drives for families in need, creating mentorship programs pairing high school students with middle schoolers. And though Tyler still had moments of falling back into old patterns of entitlement, He had people now who would call him out, including Maya, who had discovered that holding someone accountable and writing them off forever were two different things. On the last day of summer, before their junior year, the group gathered at the community center to celebrate their projects. And as Maya looked around at the diverse faces, the friendships that had formed, the real change they'd created together, she felt something she hadn't experienced since the day of her arrest, a sense of belonging, of being seen and valued for exactly who she was. And while she wouldn't have chosen the path that led here, she understood now what her mother meant about transforming pain into purpose. Tyler caught her eye across the room and raised his juice bottle in a small toast. And Maya smiled, not forgetting, because some things shouldn't be forgotten, but acknowledging that people can change when they're given accountability, consequences, support, and a genuine chance to be better. As the sun set through the community center windows, casting golden light across young faces full of hope and determination, Judge Lawson and Officer Callahan stood together in the doorway, watching their children laugh with friends they'd helped each other find. And Judge Lawson said softly, "You know, Derek, our children taught us something important, that justice isn't just about punishment or vindication. It's about creating the conditions for people to become who they're capable of being. And sometimes the hardest and most important thing we can do is believe in someone's capacity for change, while still holding them accountable for the harm they've caused." Officer Callahan nodded, his voice thick with emotion. "I failed your daughter that day, Patricia. I failed as an officer and as a father, and I will spend the rest of my career making sure I never make those assumptions again, making sure I see the child in front of me instead of the story I've told myself. And I will teach my son to do the same, not with words, but with actions, every single day." The two parents shook hands, a gesture of respect and shared commitment, and then returned to the celebration where their children were building a future neither could have imagined on that terrible day in the school parking lot, a future where mistakes weren't endings, but beginnings, where accountability and grace could coexist, where young people of different backgrounds could see each other's humanity and fight for each other's dignity, and where one girl's refusal to let injustice have the final word had transformed not just her own life, but an entire community's understanding of what it means to truly see, truly listen, and truly change.